The Joker is one of the most iconic villains in all of comics. Even a Marvel fan like myself has to appreciate the writing behind a character like the Joker. There are classic lines that could only be put in the mouth of the Joker. Lines like, "If I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice." Or, "I kill people when it's funny. Why would killing you be funny?" Could only be said by someone disconnected from reality in a very particular way. The dance between Batman and Joker is classic. There's an argument among comic fans about who the best Joker was. By far, my favorite Joker actor has been Mark Hamill, but there was something special about the way Heath Ledger played the part that's hard to quantify in any way other than this. Heath Ledger's Joker is the only portrayal with a real-world body count, and it's that of Heath Ledger himself. The Joker is a genius and a lunatic. He's intelligent enough to know how economics works to the level that he successfully turns fish into currency, and crazy enough to fight a ninja vigilante on a nightly basis. That's what I hated about Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of the Joker most of all. This was a softer, gentler version of the Joker. He doesn't want to be bad, he just wants to make critter balloons and make people laugh. He's just not smart enough or together enough to stay out of trouble. He has a condition that causes him to laugh at inappropriate times, and this leads to him being bullied, and then he retaliates and ends up killing people. This is, on some level, the problem with villains. There's a part of us that sympathizes with their villainous nature. After all, we all have bad days where we do something we later wish we hadn't. We all have that day where we think Joker was right when he suggested that we were all just one bad day away from becoming like him. Who hasn't wanted to turn the world economy on its head at least a few times? And making fish the global exchange currency sometimes feels like just as valid of an option as any other. At least, it would if we all lived in a comic book and everything went back to normal at the turn of the last panel. But even when we identify with these villains, we don't consider ourselves villainous. That ends up meaning that, in order to make these characters the protagonists of a story, we have to neuter them of their irredeemably evil endeavors and make them truly relatable. We need them to be the bad guys without being all that bad, but for the Joker to really be Joker, he really does need to be that bad. This year, I decided to write a horror/thriller for Halloween, but I didn't want anyone to be able to do to my villain what was done to Joker in this film. My villain is dangerous and irredeemable exactly because he corrupts the seemingly incorruptible. Today I'm going to include a sample from my latest novella Trouble with Telepaths, so that you can get a feel for the kind of villain you're up against in this story. You can read the full story for free on Kindle Unlimited. I decided to do this because my previous holiday story, The Last Sin of Ebenezer Scrooge, was so much fun to write and was such a success. It still has 4 stars on Amazon. That is also available on Kindle Unlimited. Alright, that's enough about you two. Tell me about Death. Stormcloud smiled. Death and I were best friends in college. We met on the dreamscape of the college campus. It took us almost 3 months to work up the courage to meet in person. Julia laughed. You make it sound like a date. Stormcloud smiled and blushed. A mundane, even a truth, could never understand. It's not romantic, and it's not sexual, but there's a kind of connection that 2 telepaths can share that's nothing like anything you've ever experienced. It's not pleasure, but it's so intimate. You melt into each other, and pieces of you get left in the other. Julia took Stormcloud's hand. It sounds like the 2 of you were close, then. Stormcloud beamed. Closer than master and heir. And it was such a pleasure to be connected to him. He was the kindest, most giving person I've ever known. He was heir to darkness and Stormcloud were the tightest allies. Once when we were walking through the park, he found a $10 bill, and he spent an hour finding out who the owner was. He stepped in the middle of a hand fight 5 times that I saw personally. It was amazing. He helped little old ladies and tiny little babies. Just being near him made me better. Then why isn't he allowed to wander free? Storm Cloud looked shocked by the question. Because he'd kill us all. He's not the friend I knew anymore. At least, not the same way. He's the hunter now, and that will always corrupt him. I was heir to Storm Cloud, and he was heir to darkness. The former heir to darkness, Dark Knight, was helping the master of Storm Cloud, canonically Dynamite, and the master of darkness, canonically Wind, had suspended the hunter between them and a young telekinetic called Fairy Dust. When Wind disappeared, it fell to Death and Dark Knight to secure that part of the hunter. It fell back on Fairy Dust hard. Somehow, the hunter managed to make a deal of some sort with Dark Knight. Death didn't want to secure it. He wanted to destroy it. Dark Knight managed to work with the hunter to ensure that it didn't happen that way. Julia wasn't following everything, but there was enough to start to build a picture. So then the hunter took over his mind or whatever? Storm Cloud shook his head. I'm canonically Diamond Facet. I was heir to Storm Cloud. Death convinced me to turn against my master, to assume control of the domain of Storm Cloud. Together, Death and I made a rule that exiled anyone infected with the hunter from our dreamscapes. Somehow, Death convinced Dark Knight that it was Old Man Storm Cloud that had turned on him. Dark Knight hunted down Dynamite and killed him. That only left Dark Knight and Death as the hunter. Since Dark Knight is an exiled telekinetic, he can't infect anyone else. Since Death had control of it in himself, he just assumed that he could ensure that the hunter dies in this generation. Storm Cloud took a deep breath. Then he had a daughter that was sick. She wasn't fighting her illness. Death couldn't just let her die. So he infected her. That's Liz. Julia tried pulling the puzzle pieces together. Liz is a telepath. Storm Cloud nodded, and Leather Jacket gave a mock applause. So the hunter thought it saw a way to survive? It stayed hidden in her until it could reach out for Dark Knight. Once Dark Knight knew that there was a telepath infected somewhere that wasn't Death, he started killing. We reached out to Death to get his help tracking down Dark Knight. That was 15 years ago. The hunter wormed its way to control of Death more and more over the years. Death has convinced himself that he's still in control, and that may be true on some level, but even on his best days we don't treat him like a friend anymore.